Have you ever witnessed a quiet moment that changed everything? Just a look, a decision, a simple act like pouring a cup of coffee, and suddenly, an entire community stands up. If you've ever been part of something like that, or if someone's quiet courage once changed your life, share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it today. And if you believe in quiet heroes, subscribe now to join us in telling the stories no one else will. The video was shaky, caught on someone's phone. A woman, mid-30s, dark curls tied back, her hands trembling as she untied her apron. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She didn't even cry. She placed the folded apron on the counter, looked toward the man and his dog, and gave the smallest nod. Then she turned and walked out into the morning sun. Her name was Clara Byrne, and she'd just been fired for pouring coffee for a veteran and his service dog. Not for theft, not for breaking company policy in some dramatic way, but because she refused to follow an order that felt wrong. No one in that cafe knew it then, but that moment would ripple far beyond the brick walls of Byrne and Beans. It would reach military bases, headlines, and eventually, Washington. But to understand why this mattered to anyone, you'd have to understand who Clara Byrne really was. Once, a long time ago, she was just Clara, a military spouse with a quick laugh and a quiet strength. Married to Staff Sergeant Ethan Byrne, U.S. Army. They had plans, a life, and a dream to open a cafe together once he retired. But Ethan never came home. He died in Kandahar 2 weeks after their anniversary. When the casket came back, draped in a flag, Clara didn't fall apart. Not then. She kept her grief folded, like the flag they gave her, and stored it in silence. And then one spring morning, she opened Byrne and Beans. Not as a business, but as a mission. A second home for the people who had nowhere to go when they came back different. Men and women with quiet eyes and heavy hands. The ones who needed space, not slogans. Silence, not sympathy. Every Wednesday at 9 a.m. sharp, she hosted what she called Warriors Hour. No speeches, no agenda, just strong coffee and open seats. A whiteboard above the counter said, "You don't need to talk, you just need to sit." Clara knew every regular. She knew which vets couldn't handle being touched, who liked their eggs scrambled hard, who flinched at sudden noises, who hadn't laughed since Fallujah. She wasn't a therapist. She didn't ask questions. She just remembered, and she served. And that's how she met Mark. Late 40s, silent, carried himself like a man made of broken glass. He always came with a black lab mix named Atlas, a certified service dog in a red vest. Atlas never barked, just curled under the table and watched the door. Clara never asked what war Mark came from. She didn't need to. She saw it in the way he held his cup like it might disappear if he blinked. Somehow, Clara's place became his place, a little safer every week. Until the morning everything cracked. It was a Wednesday, Warriors Hour. The cafe was full of low murmurs, steam from mugs, the comforting hum of belonging. Then the door swung open. A man in a crisp blazer and polished shoes walked in, clipboard in hand. Logan Prescott, State Health Inspector. Clara gave him the same polite welcome she gave everyone. "Good morning. Can I help you find something?" "Unannounced inspection," he replied, tone flat. He moved like a scalpel, tapping counters, checking fridge seals, measuring distances. Then he froze. His eyes landed on Atlas. "That animal," he said sharply, loud enough for the entire cafe to hear, "is in violation of state health code. No animals allowed in food service areas." The room went still. Clara stepped out from behind the counter, voice calm. Atlas is a registered service animal. Under state and federal law, he's allowed to be here. I don't care what vest he's wearing, Prescott snapped. Dogs carry dander, hair, saliva. If he stays, this establishment could face immediate closure. Mark tensed, his knuckles white around his cup. Atlas didn't move, just watched. Every eye in the cafe was on Clara now, and she said, quietly but without flinching, I won't ask a veteran to leave, and I won't ask his service dog to leave either. You're willing to risk your job for that? No, she said. I'm willing to risk it for him. That's when another voice cut in. Sharp, female, icy. Clara Byrne, said Ella Ryden, district manager for the cafe's parent company, who had just stepped through the door. You've just violated corporate health compliance protocol in front of a state official. You're terminated, effective immediately. A spoon clattered to the floor. Clara didn't move. Then she turned, slowly, and looked at every face in that cafe. Some were stunned. Some were ashamed. Some were just tired. She looked at Mark, at Atlas. Then she untied her apron, folded it, and placed it gently on the counter. She turned to Lena, the young barista frozen at the espresso machine, and said, almost in a whisper, "Make sure Mark gets his refill." Then she walked out the side door. No one followed, but someone, just someone, had pressed record, and somewhere between social media scrolls and invisible networks, a story had just begun. A quiet act of defiance, a line drawn. A woman fired not because she broke a rule, but because she refused to break her soul. For 37 minutes, no one spoke. The cafe stood still, suspended like it was holding its breath. A few customers left their half-finished drinks behind, heads low. Some stayed, unmoving, as if silence could somehow undo what had just happened. Mark hadn't touched his coffee since Clara left. His hands rested on his knees, fists unclenched, but not relaxed. Atlas lay beneath him, tail still, eyes alert. Not anxious, not aggressive, just waiting. Lena, the young barista, wiped her hands on her apron and poured Mark another cup. She set it down gently, like she was setting down something sacred. Her voice barely broke a whisper. "I didn't know what to say," she would admit later, "but I knew. If I walked away from that machine, I'd be walking away from her." Outside, morning mist clung low to the streets of Fort Camden. Then came the sound, low at first, like a growl tucked under the breath of the wind. A rumble, soft, getting louder. Coffee rippled in cups. The glass windows vibrated just slightly. Someone stood and peered outside. Another followed, then another. Down the main road, framed by sidewalks lined with old maples and faded flags, came 4 dark government vehicles. Not military Humvees with mounted flags, not blaring sirens or flashing theatrics. These were quiet, unmarked, official, heavy. They pulled into the lot without hurry. Doors opened. Out stepped Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Cross. No medals today, no dress blues, just a tan base uniform, creased and clean. He carried no clipboard, no briefcase, just a phone in his left hand and a quiet storm in his eyes. Behind him followed 2 Marines in standard utility fatigues. Behind them, 3 men in civilian clothes, older, all veterans. One walked with a cane, another wore a faded desert storm cap. The last clutched a binder full of worn-out paperwork. They didn't speak. They stood. Not in formation, in solidarity. Cross stepped through the door as the cafe bell chimed once, like it always did. No one moved. Prescott, the inspector, straightened his spine and stepped forward, unsure whether to speak or salute. Cross didn't give him the chance. "You don't need to know who someone is," he said, quiet but unmistakably firm. "To treat them with dignity." Prescott froze. I didn't know he was a..." "It doesn't matter what you knew." Cross turned to Lena. "Is Clara Byrne here?" Lena shook her head. She was fired for standing up for Mark and Atlas. The room felt colder. Cross pressed his lips together, then nodded once to the Marine nearest him. The man stepped forward and handed Lena a printed letter in a sealed envelope. She glanced at it. Her eyes widened. "It's a request," she read, "from Fort Camden Base Command, asking Ms. Byrne to report directly to headquarters. Today." Mark looked up, really looked, like he hadn't let himself until now. Atlas stirred beneath him, tail wagging once, just once. Prescott stepped back. Ella Ryden, standing by the counter, went pale. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but Cross looked at her. Just once. "You've made your decision," he said. "We'll make ours." Clara was still sitting in her truck. Same jeans, same coffee-stained flannel. Her hands were on the steering wheel, unmoving. The engine was off. She didn't know what she was waiting for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Then her phone buzzed. One notification. "Message from Fort Camden. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Cross formally requests your presence at base headquarters." She blinked. She read it again. And for the first time since the door closed behind her that morning, Clara exhaled. Fort Camden looked different from the passenger side. Clara had driven these roads countless times as a military wife, dropping off muffins, coffee canisters, notes of encouragement. But never like this. Now she was walking past gates, salutes, clean sidewalks, endless rows of beige buildings with names that sounded like ghosts. Transition Unit, Family Services, Wounded Warrior Office. At the end of a quiet hall, Colonel Cross stood waiting outside a door labeled Veteran Transition and Wellness Initiative. "Clara," he said, reaching out a hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook it, confused, cautious. "I'm not really sure why I'm here." "Then let me show you." Inside, the room smelled like drywall and fresh paint. Empty folding chairs lined one wall. Whiteboards leaned against the other. Two young staffers quietly rolled out therapy mats in the corner. Everything else was boxes, dust, and possibility. "This was supposed to be a pilot program," Cross said. "For years. But programs don't work without people who understand vets, not just on paper, but in their bones." "I'm not a therapist," Clara replied, arms crossed tight. "I don't have a degree. I don't even know what this is." "No," Cross said. "You don't have credentials. What you have is something rarer." He turned to a table. There was a small object on it, a photo, taken from inside her cafe that same morning. Clara looking at Mark. Mark looking at nothing. Atlas curled beneath the table. "That moment," Cross said softly, "that was leadership." From the back of the room, a soft voice spoke. "Is that really her?" A woman stepped out. Mid-20s, sleeves pulled down to her wrists, scars visible along her neck and jaw. A golden retriever pup walked beside her, red vest marked "in training." She hesitated, then said, "I saw the video. I haven't been able to sit in a cafe since I came home. But I think I could sit in a place you run." Clara didn't respond. She couldn't. Her lungs filled. Her chest felt full and light all at once. Cross smiled. "We'd like to offer you a position, not as a name on a brochure, as the director of this center." Clara's hands dropped to her sides. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he said. "You'll build it, from the ground up, Programs, culture, routine. You already know what works. She looked at the young woman now kneeling beside the retriever, fingers trembling against soft fur. She thought of Mark, of Atlas, of Wednesday mornings and empty cups filled with meaning. And then she said, very quietly, "I'll do it." Cross nodded once. "Then let's get to work." That night, Clara stood alone in the bare-bones space that would become the new heart of Fort Camden's outreach for returning veterans. The air smelled like fresh paint and possibility. She walked slowly across the room, her footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. In her hand, she held a photograph. Weathered edges, the color slightly faded. Ethan, her husband, sitting outside the old cafe, boots kicked up, smiling at her as if he knew she'd still be here, doing this. She pinned it to the wall. No plaque, no frame, just memory and a mission. The next few weeks were anything but smooth. The Department of Defense had approved the pilot, technically, but Clara wasn't handed a team or a budget. She was handed a storage closet full of folding chairs, a stack of wellness brochures from 2009, and a list of veterans no one had been able to reach in years. So she started with what she knew: coffee. She brought in her old hand grinder, bought a new pot out of pocket, set it up on a folding table with a sign that read, "If you're here, you belong." She posted a whiteboard with 2 handwritten questions. Who needs a ride? Who needs a listener? The first vet who walked through the door was a man named Tom who hadn't spoken to anyone in 6 months. He didn't say much that day either, but he came back the next day and the day after that. Soon, others followed. A woman from Fallujah with burn scars who liked to paint in silence. A retired medic who brought in a battered guitar and played in the afternoons. Even Lena, the young barista from Burn and Beans, came by every Friday, bringing coffee and laughter and a little bit of the world they'd left behind. But not everyone believed in what Clara was building. An anonymous complaint reached the regional office. An official audit was ordered. Clipboards appeared. Suits. Government representatives who walked in with skeptical eyes and stiff postures. They reviewed logs, inspected outlets, checked the label on the coffee beans. One man, stern, unimpressed, finally asked the question they all wanted answered. "What certifications do you hold that qualify you to counsel veterans?" Clara didn't blink. She didn't flinch. "I don't have certifications," she said quietly. "I have consistency and kindness and coffee." The man didn't respond, but he wrote something down. A week later, a letter arrived. Formal, gold seal, Department of Defense header. The Wellness Center at Fort Camden had been approved for national model expansion. Clara sat at her desk and read it twice. Colonel Cross called it a victory. Clara called it humbling. And yet, despite everything growing around her, part of Clara's heart still tugged toward the little cafe that started it all. So one afternoon, unannounced, she drove back across town, parked in the same spot she used to, walked in quietly through the side door. Lena was behind the counter. "You're supposed to be famous now," she teased, sliding a mug toward her. "I'm just here for coffee," Clara said, smiling. The place had changed, but in all the right ways. Photos of veterans now lined the walls, some of them laughing, some of them holding dogs, all of them alive in ways they hadn't been before. Near the register, a new wooden sign hung. "Clara's Corner, where no one sits alone." She blinked, then reached for her cup, fingers trembling just slightly. Later that evening, Clara was scheduled to speak at a small fundraiser for veteran families at the local community center. Nothing fancy, A room full of folding chairs, homemade cookies, and children holding up crayon posters that read, "Thank you for your service." She stood in front of them with no notes, no script. "I didn't set out to build a program," she said. "I just refused to throw out a man and his dog." The room went silent. Then someone stood, then another. And then the applause came. Not polite, not rehearsed, just real. From the back of the room, Mark stood silently, a silver star now pinned to his shirt. He raised his hand in a quiet salute. Clara didn't cry, but something in her steadied, like the world had exhaled around her. Back at the center that night, Clara sat alone by the wall of photos. She added one more, a snapshot of the fundraiser crowd, all on their feet. Beside it, she pinned a photo from the cafe, the day after she left. People shoulder to shoulder, coffee in every hand, dogs under tables. No shame, no fear, just connection. Above them, she taped a card. "Legacy isn't what we build for ourselves. It's what we protect in others." And just then, the front door opened. A young veteran stepped in, nervous eyes, backpack slung too tightly over his shoulder. He hesitated. "Is this the place for, people like me?" Clara smiled gently. "No, son," she said. "This is the place for people like all of us." And just like that, her circle wasn't full. It was open. 3 weeks after the fundraiser, a letter arrived in an envelope she didn't recognize, stamped with a gold emblem, the seal of the Department of Defense. Colonel Cross didn't call. He didn't email. He showed up in person. Clara was in her office, restocking the whiteboard markers, when he knocked lightly and stepped inside. He didn't say much at first, just handed her the envelope and said, "You'll want to sit for this." She did. She opened it slowly, unfolding the heavy cardstock with careful fingers. Her eyes scanned the first line, then froze. "You are hereby nominated for the National Civilian Commendation for Distinguished Service to Veterans." She didn't move, didn't speak. Then finally, in a whisper, "I didn't do anything special." Colonel Cross smiled. "That," he said, "is exactly why you're getting it." But that wasn't all. The letter came with an invitation, not just to attend the ceremony in Washington, but to speak at the National Veterans Advocacy Conference. Clara stared at him, stunned. "I'm not a public speaker," she said. "You are now." The day she left for D.C., she packed light. One clean blazer, one worn wristwatch, Ethan's, and the old notebook she used behind the cafe counter for years. Inside, names, birthdays, deployment anniversaries, notes like "Tiffany prefers tea" and "Don't ask Mark about March 19th. That notebook had carried more than any resume. At the airport, just as she was scanning her boarding pass, someone called her name. "Need a ride, Miss Byrne?" She turned. It was Mark. He stood tall in full dress blues. His posture was straighter now, his eyes clearer. Atlas was beside him, calm, tail gently wagging. "The base assigned me as your escort," he said with a rare smile. Clara laughed, half nerves, half awe. "You clean up well?" she said. Mark shrugged. "You're the one about to speak at the Pentagon." The ballroom was larger than she imagined. White tablecloths, 100 name tags, cameras at every angle. The projection screen behind the stage read, in soft gold serif letters, "Clara Byrne, Veteran Wellness Advocate." Her name had never looked like that before. When she stepped up to the microphone, her voice felt small compared to the room. But the room leaned in. She paused, looked down at her notes, then closed them. "I'm not a general," she said softly. I'm not a doctor. I didn't write policy. I ran a cafe near a military base. I served coffee. I listened. She glanced at the crowd. Some nodded. Some already had tears in their eyes. But in that space, I watched something sacred happen. Veterans didn't come to be fixed. They came to be seen. Some days they didn't speak at all. Some days they just needed to sit, to drink something warm and know they weren't broken just because they were quiet. She took a breath. And one day, I got fired for letting a man sit with his service dog. That was the moment everything changed. But the truth is, her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. It was never about coffee. It was about dignity. The room erupted. Applause thundered through the hall, rising like a wave that refused to stop. From the back of the room, Mark stood, hand resting on Atlas's head. He didn't cheer. He didn't clap. He just nodded, like a soldier hearing his orders finally spoken clearly. Later that night, long after the lights dimmed and the crowd disappeared, Clara stepped outside into the DC air. She needed silence. The world had gotten loud again. A man approached, gray suit, white beard, soft eyes behind thin glasses. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked. Clara studied his face. It stirred something, but she couldn't place it. He reached into his coat and pulled out an old photo. Faded, grainy. Her, Ethan, and him. Outside the cafe. Years ago. Ethan was laughing. She had her hand on the man's shoulder. "You poured me a cup of coffee the day I got my medical discharge," he said. "You didn't ask me what I'd done. You didn't try to say the right thing. You just smiled." He held out the photo. "It's yours now." Clara took it, fingers trembling. Words caught in her throat. Back in Mason, Georgia, the town held a small celebration for her return. Nothing grand, just what she liked. But Clara didn't go straight there. She drove to the wellness center. It was late, quiet. A few vets lingered near the fire pit, trading jokes or simply sharing space. Clara walked to the photo wall. She reached into her bag, pulled out two things. One, a photo of the audience at the conference standing to applaud her. Two, the photo the man had given her, the old one, with Ethan. She pinned both side by side. Beneath them, she wrote a simple line on a torn scrap of paper. "Honor grows where kindness is consistent." Just then, the door creaked open. A young man in civilian clothes stepped in, fidgeting, nervous. Maybe 23, maybe younger. He looked around, eyes wide. "Is this the place?" He hesitated, voice cracking. "For people like us?" Clara smiled. "No," she said softly. "This is the place for people like all of us." And just like that, the circle grew wider. In a world that rushes past kindness and forgets to pause for grief, we hope this story reminded you of something real, something worth holding on to. If Clara's story moved you, share it with someone who believes in quiet heroes. And in the comments, tell us, have you ever seen an act of quiet courage? Have you ever been that courage for someone else? We read every comment, because sometimes the strongest stand doesn't come with a salute. It comes with a seat and a cup of coffee.